Yanqing and I go way back. This was a character that was deemed to be the best character leading into the release of the Honkai Star Rail. This character had a few glaring issues that was brushed over. Part of his damage was tied to RNG, and he, unlike the first limited character, didn't have that high of a multiplier to compensate for hitting only one target. With these issues being widely known, this character is now the bane of your 50-50 gacha pity. How fitting that he shares the same element as a familiar face. There is a few things you must understand about Star Rail before its worldwide launch. Characters weren't as widely accessible because the beta didn't give many resources to the player, and you depended on the RNG of the gacha system to tell you whom you'd use for the time being. The theory crafting scene that is present nowadays also wasn't a thing, and to be quite honest, wasn't on the magnitude it currently is on even months into the game's launch. Players also didn't have much time to farm for relics, as beta access was on a time limit, so any character that would give a high amount of free crit stats would seem very valuable. These would all be some of the reasons why Yanqing was to appear as the best character, but what would unsheath the truth would be time. So let's go back to that time, where Yanqing would be regarded as one of the best characters in the game, and if you are a Post 2.0 player, I could see why this might be unbelievable. The high priority reroll targets in Honkai Star will be Bronya, Bailu, and Gepard. Just a quick warning, this video might be very hard to watch. A character like Bailu will be really good. Also, the sheer healing she puts out is definitely rivals Natasha's healing. Next up, Bronya. Remember I talk about this character all the time whenever I can because I love her. I think she's an amazing character, another future-proof design. If you did not know, she pushed up the CR of one of your allies. Bronya made the strongest damage dealers even stronger. Bailu had amazing synergy with Bronya, but also had a revive for your squishiest characters, and Gepard was the best in slot defensive option to the top tier damage dealer at the time, and that character was Yanqing. Yanqing would be the only damage dealer that was recommended to be chosen, as he was amazing for the early game and leading up to the inevitable in-game content where you would need more than one team to beat said content. A lot of the enemies from the early to in-game being weak to ice helped. A dedicated relic set that also shared the same cavern relic set for the best damage buffer, a shield giving defensive option that allows you to keep your passive for maximum damage uptime, and lastly a 4-star that reliably gave defense down on the AoE, also being the ice element would allow Yanqing to shine as much as he did. Seal being the first limited damage dealer upon the launch of Star Rail and sharing the same path as Yanqing meant nothing because you needed 2 damage dealers after all to clear the contents offered to you. And all the prior discussion of whom was the better character would cease to exist as the community wasn't as developed to the point as it is now, where damage dealers are directly being compared to one another. It wouldn't be until the second half of 1.0 where things would shake up just a little bit. The release of Jing would not only affect Yanqing, but also any other hunt damage dealer. Despite being a character mainly known for AoE damage because of his erudition typing, Jing could still put out a competitive amount of damage in single target scenarios, sometimes even more if the stars aligned. Considering this character only needed 2 4-stars while Yanqing absolutely needed a 5-star, or else he would risk his damage falling off, meant that one would feel superior to the other. There would be a free 4-star you could use in place of Gepard for Yanqing teams, but this character would remain underused at the time as most players wanted the easiest and safest option available. This meant one thing however, the experience for players that own Yanqing would differ from one another, as your teammates would depend on what was available on your account. So by this point, things were already alluding to his downfall even in the debut patch, as players would begin to spend more time playing the game. Patch 1.1 first half would be the rival of Silverwolf, which for any single target damage dealer would be a game changer. Massive defense shred and elemental weakness implanting allowed hunt characters to dish out more damage than they did previously. Not only did Seal, but also Yanqing saw more usage in this patch. It also helped that in the same team as Silverwolf, all of Yanqing's teammates would be of the ice element, which would allow for a more consistent chance of landing that ice weakness on those enemies, which is very important for a character that deals even more damage against enemies that are weak to ice. Since Pela was so good for Yanqing teams, you could in theory get away with not using Silverwolf if enemies had ice weakness already. This will signal one very important thing about this character. Yanqing had access to his best teammates and resources since day 1. His damage would feel as if it was capped at a certain point, which isn't a great thing considering this was a month into the game. With this actually coming to fruition, Yanqing would begin to drop in terms of usage as more players would move on to newer characters being released, and the Great Trio were the true culprits of that. The character that had the biggest impact on Yanqing would be Jingliu, arriving in the first half of 1.4. Jingliu was much more versatile than Yanqing, requiring less skill points and synergized even better with Yanqing's best teammates such as Pela and Bronya. It also didn't help that the damage output of Jingliu was high in not only AoE, but even 1 to 2 mob scenarios, which is where hunt characters would thrive. She was simply better. Considering lore-wise, it's pretty accurate for this fate to had awaited Yanqing. Around this time would be where players were fed up with Yanqing as his glaring issues were all the more visible. His damage output had an element of RNG and required him to not take damage at all. Yanqing also dished out less damage than 5-star characters that were continuously being released to the game, and then Jingliu being a direct power creep to Yanqing will give the players the green light that it was time to move on. Now in all honesty, the video could end here, because this is the complete history of Yanqing, but there is a few things I thought was worth mentioning. Ruan Mei would release in the first half of 1.6, and her being a character as overloaded as she is would essentially give every character a pseudo buff, but for Yanqing specifically, she allowed the character to break toughness more consistently, which would help alleviate the issues of enemies hitting the character. However, Jingliu being the 6-star version of Yanqing, she was to also receive a buff this patch, and her hypercarry team became even better. Dr. Ratio releasing in the second half of this very same patch, and being our second limited hunt character, meant even more of a tragic fate for Yanqing. It also didn't help that he was given to the players for free. By this point, the usage for Yanqing was next to none, so Dr. Ratio's release pretty much sealed the deal. At the time of my recording, we are to receive a dedicated endgame that, unlike Pure Fiction, is now catered towards single target damage dealers, meaning Yanqing should see a nice rise in usage following the release of this endgame. At this point in time, many players have lost their 50-50 to this character, and he pairs insanely well with Silverwolf, whom will also be a staple in the new content. Obviously, Jingliu will still do more damage depending on the level of investment, but this will be a nice nonetheless for a character that is seemingly the worst 5-star damage dealer to date. I might be a little hopeful for this outcome, especially knowing we all have a Dr. Ratio itching to be used in the very same content, whom actually takes advantage of Silverwolf more than Yanqing does. Absolutely cucked. I also want to mention that this is the first video I've worked on where I absolutely did not want to use the character I've created the video of. When you get used to the comfortability of characters like Kafka and Jingliu with a game plan that is typically consistent enough to pull off every fight, using Yanqing is a complete drag. It's one thing to be CC'd by the enemy, but having to deal with the feeling of CCing yourself is the best way I describe Yanqing. Also, there's no innate chance of reducing his RNG. I mean, characters like Black Swan and Silverwolf can do so with increasing their total effect hit rate, but you can't necessarily increase the chances of landing a follow-up attack from Yanqing. You just have to hope it procs before you lose it from the enemy hitting you. Considering Hoyoverse does not buff characters, this will most likely remain the fate of Yanqing. Considering we are seeing a rise in the HP of enemies, his damage already isn't consistent enough to keep up. What was once a character that was deemed to be one of the best leading into the launch is the only one out of that bunch that hasn't stood the test of time. Have it so bad, I'd rather use Natasha because at the very least she makes fights such as the Sam boss fight actually possible because of the power healers have against them. He is one of the lowest utilization rated characters in the game. Thank you for watching and have a nice rest of your day.